Our next speaker will join us online, and he is Andrew Pace, who will be talking to us about library collections as data for computational science. And Alan, I believe you will get your question of this morning maybe answered in detail now. Andrew leads a team of research scientists, architects, and engineers who track library and broader data science trends, and is responsible for building a coordinated R&D strategy for OCLC research. Previously, he directed the development of the WorldShare platform, WorldShare management services, Content DM, and several other library management applications. Prior to joining OCLC, Andrew was head of information technology at North Carolina State University Libraries, where he spent 9 years participating in several digital library projects. Andrew is a past president of the Library Information Technology Association, a division of ALA, and was a member of the ALA Executive Board from 2016 to 2019. So I think this is evidence enough that Andrew is perfectly positioned to talk to us about library collections as data for computational science. Andrew, over to you. And we can see your slides, and you can go ahead, please.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're in the States like I am. I wish I could be there with you personally, but I'm pleased to be with you virtually. I'm coming at you live from my home office in Dublin, Ohio, with a virtual background of OCLC's headquarters just a few miles away. I've got an ambitious agenda today in which I'll try to cover a range of activities in which my team at OCLC is engaged. As a member of the OCLC research team, I won't be talking to you about any products and services that OCLC provides, but about the research and development and data science and machine learning efforts in research that help support our line of business efforts and our member libraries. My team works very closely with colleagues in global product management and global technologies to make the best of the knowledge, evidence, and models created in OCLC research. I'm fortunate to be working with a team of engineers, architects, and data scientists who are leaders in their field. Some of them were doing data science before we even called it that. OCLC is one of the few organizations that puts this kind of investment into applied research, and I'm thankful every day to lead such a team, which is just a portion of the membership and research division led by Lorcan Dempsey. This team works on everything from prototype applications like the Virtual International Authority File and Archive Grid to behind the scenes research related to BibFrame, IIIF, and record clustering. The team spends most of their time working with WorldCat data, so that's where I will start as well. For context, it might not be big enough for most data scientists to call it big data, but by library measures, WorldCat is a significantly large data set with over 500 million bibliographic records representing over 3 billion library holdings. All of this in addition to 52 million knowledge-based records from 730 providers, a WorldCat registry that includes thousands of global libraries, and a central article index of nearly 4 billion items. And the majority of this database is non-English, representing nearly 500 languages. So my first example of analyzing collections as data has to do with the entire WorldCat corpus. During the early days of the COVID lockdown, a small team started looking at a more clever way to dashboard the data that we have, not only to answer all of the one-off questions that came my team's way, but also to better benchmark and evaluate the quality of WorldCat data. The team wanted to gain reliable and consistent metrics, offer at-a-glance info with easily accessible reports and visualization, create self-service business intelligence for the organization, empower decision makers with more data, and free staff from routine number crunching. Just one example that I'll give here has to do with Provenance. Looking at record contribution, it allowed us to sort of look at WorldCat with an eye towards where record contributions to the WorldCat corpus were coming from. And these are just a few of the sample questions that we looked at in terms of Provenance. It also let us create some interesting visualizations around record formats, what kinds of records are in WorldCat, We can also do deep dives on specific bibliographic records fields. This is from an older experiment. For about 6 years, we tracked the usage of marked fields in WorldCat, reporting not only how often a tag and its constituent subfields have been used, even ones that shouldn't exist, but we were also able to analyze selected subfields and their contents. This experiment ceased a few years ago, but we're looking at new ways to report on and visualize these data. We were also able to start experimenting with better data visualization, this one using Tableau and giving us a broad view of WorldCat data. So we're very excited about this area of visualization. Next, I'd like to talk about some analytics and machine learning techniques employed at OCLC. This will be of particular interest to folks in international cataloging. I'm stealing very liberally from a presentation by my colleague Cynthia Whitaker at OCLC and our colleague John Reamer from UCLA in California. Here's a picture of a reference desk that predates COVID restrictions. As many of you probably know, having only Latin alphabet text strings for speakers of non-Roman languages makes using discovery tools really hard. Users have to know how the library typically romanizes the language that they would much rather search directly using a more familiar script. At the ALA conference in 2018, there was a program held called New Directions in Non-Latin Script Access, where the idea of doing automated enhancements, especially for Russian, was a focus. At the same conference, John Reamer from UCLA inquired with OCLC about the possibility of blanketing legacy records for Russian titles in the WorldCat database with Cyrillic script. And later that year, UCLA formed a project team consisting of catalogers of non-Roman titles and an IT expert with an eye toward work at the network level with any improvements to bibliographic data that they could achieve. UCLA chose Russian since it was one of the languages with a mostly one-to-one relationship between transliteration and Cyrillic characters, as well as language that a number of UCLA's original catalogers were familiar with. Russian is the 10th most common language among resources described in WorldCat. If Russian worked out well, there was a desire to move on to other languages following the initial project. With OCLC's implementation of Unicode, it became possible to add any number of scripts to WorldCat records. Simultaneous with UCLA's plan, OCLC Research was proceeding with a separate project. Former metadata program officer Karen Smith Yoshimura, who was also a presenter at that same conference, came to my team in research, specifically to Jenny Chavez, OCLC's lead data scientist. In August and September of 2019, we realized these two projects were both in the works and decided to join forces and work together. Peter Fletcher at UCLA became a major advisor for the OCLC work in terms of project design and review of the records. Jenny worked with our colleague Mary Hessig, one of OCLC's longtime catalogers who specializes in Russian language materials, to devise a way to review the candidate records. I could spend the rest of my time talking about this project. Instead, I'll just note that some of the data challenges here and encourage those interested to check out the two posts on OCLC's Hanging Together blog. The links are on this slide, but a simple Google search for Hanging Together and Cyrillic will do the trick as well. Basically, we wanted a strategy that would be scalable to thousands of records needing added values without any dependence on follow-up human review. After a plan was hatched to extract the data, we consulted with the Slavic cataloging community and no concerns were raised. As an example of how this project thrived on joint collaboration, UCLA determined early on that if they were to query WorldCat one record at a time, it would take them 2 to 3 years to scan the entire database looking for candidate records. Instead, the OCLC research team was able to provide a comprehensive list of qualifying records. Of course, there were problems like defective transliteration and diacritic shortcuts, or creating an effective stop list of strings to be left alone. We learned that not only is transliteration hard to use for search and retrieval, it is also difficult for catalogers to apply correctly. About 1/3 of the records analyzed had errors. The effort was a huge success. We were able to improve over 1 million records in WorldCat. Note the huge increase in statistics records in WorldCat with Cyrillic over the year the project took place. Cyrillic is now in 2nd place in WorldCat for non-Latin scripts behind CJK. Cyrillic is followed very closely by Hebrew and Arabic script records in terms of numbers, with over 27 million from each of those scripts. Following the success of adding Cyrillic to Russian language titles published in Russia, OCLC decided to move forward with additional languages that use Cyrillic. Jenny from OCLC Research again led this effort, and I'll talk about something that she did in just a second. Metadata quality staff put her in touch with the Cyrillic catalogers, and she took it from there. We definitely hope that we can move on to attempt this enrichment and discovery experience with other languages. Every language probably warrants an assessment of the unique wrinkles that might exist for that language, as well as consultation of the relevant metadata community. Personally and professionally, I look forward to more records from African nations being represented in WorldCat so that we can tackle the challenges of description represented in those rich collections. Here's a small glimpse of some of the continued research that is going on in data science. Don't worry, you're not meant to read this. It's a portion of a much larger chart of non-Latin characters. Jenny, whom I mentioned earlier, was frustrated by some of the errors she was seeing in the data we worked with. A big problem with converting, transliterating those Latin texts back into Cyrillic is that the diacritics sometimes get lost. Either they were never entered or they sometimes got lost moving between systems. To create the visualization, she counted bigram frequencies. These are two-letter pairs for words occurring in Cyrillic titles in WorldCat. She took those same titles, transliterated the text to Latin, stripped the diacritics, and then retranslated it back into Cyrillic and calculated the frequencies. You'll notice some of the spikes on the bottom chart. The differences are the letter combinations that are more common when the diacritics are missing. This is an exciting development of machine learning to help train the system to apply this to avoid and correct mistakes in the data going forward in the future. That project is just one tip of the iceberg. Each year, OCLC Research receives anywhere from 10 to 20 requests for access to WorldCat data to help answer some of the most intriguing questions in the humanities, social sciences, and data science. Only about 5 to 10% of these queries come from libraries and librarians themselves, though I'm sure librarians are responsible for guiding researchers to the rich resource that is WorldCat. I've listed just a few of the most recent research projects here, everything from counting records or experimenting with record clustering to international analysis of children's literature or the rise of nationalism in 19th and 20th century Europe. I want to digress for a minute to talk about data provisioning, because we've talked about research data management and some other projects. In order to provide support for external researchers, I needed just some sort of rubric and process for streamlining OCLC's contribution. There are many great resources of library-related data out there, and I want to look at those examples, but also inject some efficiency into our own process. Some of those places you can find really interesting data. JSTOR's data for research. The Library of Congress has freely downloadable data. The British Library, the National Library of Scotland's Data Foundry, OCLC itself, of course, and growingly, a rich set of data available as linked data from Wikimedia. Each request is analyzed to determine whether the request is compelling, achievable, and valuable to the community. These are the kinds of questions that I need to consider when we're looking at data provisioning. What's the affiliation of the requester? Are they unaffiliated or are they a member of OCLC? What kind of access are they looking for through an application, an API, or proprietary tools to get data? What's the scope? Do they need just record counts, training data, full data, augmented data? For OCLC purposes, I need to consider where the data is coming from WorldCat, from its authorities, from the Virtual International Authority file, or other resources that we have access to. What value of data is being given? Is it just a portion of the data? What quantity or quality or the frequency with an API that they might be after? And finally, what kind of provision? Is it one-time, one-off, downloadable, licensable? Could I make the data available with a simple click-through agreement? If you're considering doing data provisioning to outside parties from your library or organization, I would encourage you to consider these kinds of questions. The third example includes a new phrase that I have invented, bibliographic transactional analysis. It's an attempt to combine the high-level analysis of bibliographic data with the actual transactional data of library events like acquisition, circulation, access, etc. Here's an example. A large library consortium in the US had a list of titles and associated awards. These literary and scholarly awards were focused on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The symbols at the bottom of the screen are just a sampling of the dozens of awards that were being analyzed. OCLC was able to take this list and compare it to the acquisitions and holdings of consortium members, thus determining the strength of their collections in these areas. Other examples abound. I've asked my team to do what they can to apply a lens of anti-racism and advancing equity to any and all future data analysis. Libraries are already providing interesting use cases, like online access analysis in the wake of COVID restrictions, looking at acquisition and circulation stats, like in the example I just mentioned, use of interlibrary loan and consortial borrowing to support access to the collective collection. And I'm only being slightly sycophantic by suggesting that everyone read up on my boss Lorcan Dempsey's musings on collaboration and the collective collection in libraries. The DEI Awards example provides a good segue to my final topic, and that is being mindful of the responsibilities we have in this space. This is the last, but certainly not least, portion of the presentation. Headlines abound in data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence communities about bias in data, weaponizing analytics, and irresponsible behavior. These new disciplines, applied to libraries, lack the kind of agency, guidance, and best practices that we are more familiar with in other areas, like digital libraries, scholarly communication, assessment, and IT systems and services. Early last year, OCLC published a new research agenda titled Responsible Operations, Data Science, Machine Learning, and AI in Libraries. The agenda is intended to help chart library community engagement with data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. The positions and report are developed by our recent researcher in residence, Thomas Padilla, in partnership with an advisory group and a landscape group comprised of more than 70 libraries and professionals from universities, libraries, museums, archives, and other organizations. Thomas was recently appointed as Senior Director of Collections Technology and Partnerships at the Center for Research Libraries. You can download the paper via the short link noted here. You can also find a recording of a webinar where Thomas reviewed the main points of the position paper. I have to point out that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants in this field, in this emerging ecosystem when I talk about the community agenda. The paper presents interdependent set of technical, organizational, and social challenges organized across 7 areas of investigation to be addressed en route to library operationalization of data science, machine learning, and AI. I'd like to take a few minutes to highlight just some of them. First, responsible operations. Responsible operations call for sustained engagement with human biases manifest in training data, machine learning models, and outputs. Among his recommendations, Padilla suggests developing a range of approaches to auditing data science, machine learning, and AI approaches. Also, for example, to support transparency, explainability, and accountability, practitioners should evaluate terms and conditions associated with cloud-based off-the-shelf machine learning and AI solutions. This is all the more important given current events. We must work together to exercise data science tools equitably and with the responsibility necessary to advance those efforts. Second, it's critical that a community arrive at shared development and distribution methods. The library community requires interprofessional and interdisciplinary venues, publication outlets, and funding sources that facilitate shared development, implementation, and assessment of algorithmic methods in the context of cultural heritage collections. Third, we must make machine actionable collections or collections as data a core activity. You heard Samuel talk earlier about the FAIR principles, and these will be very important to broadening our efforts. Padilla concludes that workflows anchored in this core activity will begin to show the potential of algorithmic methods to assist with processing collections at scale, alleviate concerns about sustainability by providing impact on core operations, and help smooth the path to integrating probabilistic data in discovery systems, a challenge that vexes many libraries. Finally, we need to be careful not to risk pricing some institutions out of this conversation and progress. The report recommends various studies that could help form data science resource assumptions, charting paths that are feasible for a wider range of institutions. The report raises more questions than it answers, but it is meant to set out the priorities for work in this new space. In many cases, libraries and content providers lack the adequate agency to advance these efforts, but the report emphasizes that we all have a role to play. I sincerely hope you'll check out the report in more detail. And finally, one more note about acting responsibly. I work for an organization that occupies a special space in library land. As stewards of metadata, we are working to understand the systems of oppression that have accrued over time, as well as how white supremacy and racism have impacted policy and practice. As I will share with you, we are seeking consultation with the community members and doing research to understand what work is in front of us so we don't deepen harm through our actions. Earlier this year, University of Delaware Vice Provost of Libraries and Museums, Trevor Dawes, put this quite succinctly. How do we create the sorts of spaces in our libraries and in our institutions where everyone not only is valued and respected, but where they also feel valued and respected? We state in various ways that we value and respect everyone that enters our libraries, but what is the reality? Do we really treat everyone like they are valued and respected part of our community? Do we provide the services that make people feel welcomed and that they belong in our libraries? And how do people see themselves reflected in our catalogs and in our data? In 2017, this talk was given by to OCLC staff and members by Dr. Kimberly Kristen. We have never been neutral. Search, discovery, and politics of access. For many, this was a pivotal moment that allowed us to question the way we have done our work. Later that same year, the OCLC Research Library Partnership did a survey across members on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And we saw in survey results that although all institutions had active DEI efforts, they struggled to find traction in describing items and collections in a respectful and inclusive way. Since that time, we've hosted numerous webinars on this topic, as well as hosting discussion sessions. These have all been very popular, and many people have viewed the recordings and slides of these sessions, as well as reading the blog posts. People are hungry for tools and models to advance their own work. This may be the case for many of you today. My research colleagues Marilee Profit, Mercy Procaccini, and Karen Smith-Yoshimura were recently part of a project on respectful and inclusive descriptive practices of Indigenous people. Through structured interviews, they sought to understand the challenges faced by those who work in this area. Because OCLC works across the globe, we were able to engage people from a range of geographies because these are issues that are truly global. For more details, follow the link at the top of this page on the Hanging Together blog. And lastly, on this topic this year, we were pleased to announce the Reimagined Descriptive Workflows project with funding from the Mellon Foundation, which is a co-investor alongside with OCLC. We brought in the Shift Collective to help us design the meeting and also engage with a wonderful advisory board who set the agenda for the meeting rather than OCLC staff doing it themselves. The meeting was held at the end of June virtually over 3 days, and we are grateful to the participants for what they shared. Who were they? We sought those that have both lived experience as well as expertise in descriptive practice. No requirements as to institutional prestige or participation and use of OCLC services. All participants were offered a stipend for their involvement. A diverse range of institution types and roles within institutions, not just the usual suspects. Geographic diversity with participants from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States. We've been blogging about this project and we'll have a draft of a community agenda available later this year. I invite you to review this when it is available and reflect on what your place is in its implementation. We believe that this effort will be a significant landmark in repairing the bibliographic infrastructure on which we all rely. We've talked a lot today about data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and topics that probably have everyone's head swimming right now. Maybe even some of the content that I had. But here's an exciting conclusion on what we've learned about the ethical responsibilities around data curation, workflows, and management. We need humans. This is a partial distillation of what we've learned over the years on listening and learning. We are being challenged to make radical shifts. I want to emphasize much of this work goes well beyond building technical capacity. This is a problem space that lends itself to centering human feelings and relationships. Building engagement and then trust with communities needs to be a primary focus for this work to be done appropriately. Involving the communities represented in descriptions is a crucial component and will be a different way of working for many of us. Our core values around cataloging and descriptive practice need to change. We need to shift our view of cataloging from something that is done to something that may never be final. Slow it down is advice we received so many times and ways. This is going to be a challenge for our profession and even a world that values efficiency. Libraries are set up to endure for centuries, so the long game should come naturally. This needs to become the work of everyone in our organizations, not just a committee of a few, and especially not only those who have already been tasked with this work. Organizational structures and cultures resist change, so we will need to ensure that we provide the scaffolding that will help us be in this for the long term, while recognizing the urgency of the issue. We must create support for those who have been in this work, but also for those who are new. The work around confronting histories that include erasure and genocide is emotional and time-consuming. We heard this over and over again in our conversations. Organizations and leaders are essential here. And finally, we must cultivate resilience. Witness harms without taking offense. Libraries are learning organizations, and in this and all things, we are never done learning. Well, I hope that gives everyone another aspect of computational science. Thank you for taking this short but fast-paced journey with me, and multifaceted journey with me this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.